But I've heard that 93% of our generation, mostly in college, still wants to get married, and that's exactly what we're seeing around this table. So that's just a fascinating observation. I think it's really hopeful.
Are you really seeing it around the table? Because what I'm seeing around the table is a bunch of women who are like, yeah, sure, I'll marry a dude who makes $150,000 a year and pays for all my shit. That sounds a lot different than I'm looking to get married. To me,
who said that?
That sounds different.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I'm curious which one of us said that.
Well, so as we're going around the table, right, what do you think that when you say a man who can support himself and is supporting himself and can support a family, if he lives in the Santa Barbara area, what do you think that would take if you had to guess?
Probably over $300,000 a year, but we're not talking about this specific location. We're not including the fact that each of us I think everyone around the table is willing to have a 2-income household. Do you agree or do you disagree? I think partnership is everything. My dad and my stepmom, my dad is 16 years older than my stepmom. They've been together for 18 years now. He invested in her company, and now she makes more money than him, and she's the main provider of our household. I think that
he gave her money for her company, and now her
and
company's
she's
doing
paid it
well.
all back. Her company is doing much better, or it's doing well, I mean, and now she makes more money than him and pays his mortgage. And she's also helping me pay for my college. So women
that's
can
great.
be
That's
providers.
called dividends. That's called dividends. That's how that works when you invest in a company and it does well. You get money back out of it. That's
Absolutely,
how it works.
But she is a female.
He could have done that without any marriage, right?
Yeah, but I think if you find a partner who's willing to work with you and grow with you and create a sustainable life for you and a future family, I think that's an absolutely beautiful thing for both partners to have ambition. And also, I would be perfectly happy, marrying a woman who makes more money than me or less money than me, or marrying a man who makes more money than me or less money than me, as long as in our combined household we can ensure the safety of one another, and we both have similar mindsets with financial planning, investments, retirement funds, college funds if we are planning to have children, Roth IRAs, that type of issue.
What about the love thing? Is that the most important factor, or the money
for
thing?
marriage?
Absolutely.
Love for marriage, is that more important than money? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Nothing in life is free. If you marry someone for the money, you earn every penny. That's what my mom would tell me when I was a kid.
I'm sure she would.
So it would be money. That's
no.
The
point is that if you marry someone for the money, you earn every penny because you choose a life of unhappiness.
Yeah.
I think that was the lesson she always taught me. You have to be open-minded, Not everything in life is material. And I think because there are so many ways to make money independently, and I mean, for example, writing your own book and creating your own platform, I think there's less of a necessity for women to marry solely for money, when in the past and not that long ago, we couldn't even have our own credit cards, without the permission of a man.
Yeah, but you also didn't incur any debt. That's why you couldn't have credit cards.
Yeah, but we were owned property by men.
No, you weren't owned property. That's ridiculous.
There's not a point in human history where women have been property of men.
That's not what I said. I said you weren't owned property in this country, ever.
Me personally, no, but...
No women. Women were not.
In the United States, women were never considered legal property of another person.
But if you're don't have body autonomy and you can't make your own income, and you have to rely on being married in order to have any type of social standing.
Women could always make their own income in the United States. Where on earth did you get the idea that they couldn't?
Guys,
did you learn this in feminist studies class 101?
But white women were not really accepted into the working class.
If you want to argue, I'm not saying there was no room for income and that there was no room for any type of sustainable life or women to, create some type of wealth. Until really wartime, women weren't allowed in the workforce, and that was only because there were no men.
Where did you get the idea
where in the workforce were they not allowed?
They were still nurses, they were still teachers,
Guys,
they were still doing all sorts
nurses
of jobs
and
inside
teachers,
of society. What do you
so
mean?
they were limited
Same types
to
of jobs they're doing
domestic
right now,
role
by the way.
laws.
They were doing hang on, just calm down, relax. They were doing clerical work, they were teaching, they were nursing, they were doing all the same jobs that they're basically doing right now.
Okay, well, there are plenty of women who are moving up in corporate worlds as well as moving up in different sections
No, there's not
of
very many
career.
women who are moving up the corporate ladder in
Compared
corporate world.
to
Why
50
there's so
years
many,
ago?
there's so few female CEOs for a reason. They don't gravitate towards that kind of work.
Okay. You're right, I'm wrong. Women are they are only meant to do domestic work.
No, I don't think that's what he's saying.
That's not what I said. That's a mischaracterization. I'm just explaining to you the reality. I don't understand why you're being so aggressive. I haven't been mean to you.
Can I
I'm just
ask
explaining
something?
to you.
Yeah, go for it.
What the reality of the situation is.
Go ahead, and then Isabel will go. Go ahead.
What does this have to do with women not being able to own, like, have their own credit cards or open a bank account in their own
Well,
name?
because women not being able to have bank accounts and credit cards because they weren't allowed to incur debt. This was great because right now the biggest holders of debt in the United States are women. It's crushing for most women. Before that, men had to incur all the debt. So the wife could go out and spend all of the money that she wanted in her husband's name, and he had to incur the debt even post-divorce. He still had to take care of the debt. She had none of it in her name. This was one of the primary arguments against feminism from the anti-suffragettes, is that they did not want to incur debt. And now women have racked up tons and tons of it.
I mean, so have men. It's crushing for men, too. So, I mean, I don't really think anyone should be forced to incur debt, so I'm not sure why.
Well, you know what? I think that if I asked a man if he got married, if all of the debt would be incurred by the woman and all he had to do was not have a credit card or bank account, I'd take that deal in 5 seconds.
What do you mean by not be forced to incur any debt?
It means that everything that all money that I spend on
Grid
all
1
credit cards will
Motorsports
immediately in your
donated
name.
$200. In 1877, a woman was elected mayor in Kansas. Your history sucks. Accuracy matters. You are in fact wrong. Feminism has failed you. Patriarchy is the way to the truth, and stands ready to help be better.
Yo, Grid One, thank you. You had a question for her.
Yeah, I
you
just
said,
wanted to get some clarification there. Nobody should be forced to incur debt. What does that mean?
Just like in a purely hypothetical, like, perfect world, no one would be taking on debt to, like, go to college.
Well, let's talk about the real world.
Okay. In the real world, I mean, that's not possible.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it should. I mean, basically, you're implying that it's good that it's men's responsibility to incur all debt. And I feel like if that were actually the case, then we would be in a different argument where it would be like, well, women suck because women don't incur any debt and we incur all of their debt. So I feel like it's just kind of like a bad faith argument. I don't know.
Well, it's not a bad faith argument. It's just giving a descriptor for why it happened that way. Sure. Why it was that women, and there was far more anti-suffragettes than there were pro-suffragettes, by the way, made very compelling arguments, like they didn't want to get drafted, for instance. They didn't want... See, what the anti-suffragettes said was that women had the moral high ground because they weren't political tools. They weren't political tools because they couldn't vote. So they weren't tapped into as being political tools. So when they said something, they said it from a position of moral authority. They weren't being tapped into. So this is how they were able to argue successfully for things in women's interest without being just considered another voting bloc that needed to be appealed to. When it came to debt and things like this, it is true that women didn't hold they could have bank accounts, by the way, but most of the time when they opened up lines of credit and debt and accounts, it was always in their husband's name, but the husband was also responsible for all of the debt, and the women weren't. And even when the man died, the woman would get his property, but it may not be the same if a woman died, that he would automatically default and get the property. She was able to incur all sorts of wealth for herself and didn't have to spend it.
Do you think that's a more preferable system? Would you like to, like, go back to that financial?
Well, I think it's a more preferable system to begin to move women outside of the workplace. That way we can go back to a family dynamic that works, and we can get the reproductive health of the United States back up, because right now it's in the gutter. I don't know if you know this or not, but it's in the gutter.
So
our birth rate's way low.
Then why would it be a problem for any of us to say we'd like a man who can support a family? Like, why is that a problem if you think that men should be incurring all the debt and taking on all the financial responsibility? If a woman says, well, I'd like a man who can support a family in Santa Barbara,
well, because
why is that a problem?
this is a cyclical problem. So the problem is if you say, I would love to have a single income support me, but then at the same time not recognize the problem that if you double the workforce, you're going to have the wages of men, that you're basically perpetuating the same issue that you're against.